Hey everybody, this is Razib with The Conversation, and I'm here with my partner in non-crime, Josiah Neely, of R Street. And we are here to talk about, well, I mean, politics right now for sure. Stuff is happening right now, obviously. We are recording the Wednesday after the election, and we will talk about, or the elections. There was an off-year election in Virginia, New Jersey, mayoral races in New York, Minneapolis. There were measures in California, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like a regular midterm, but there's stuff going on, even though it's an odd year. So we'll talk about that later. But first, we want to talk about what was the Groypered at Heritage Foundation. And so, yeah, we talked about Nick Fuentes last week, and I thought that was going to be about it.
Yeah, I think it would be a one-off, but no, apparently
And
it's
so it's actually someone you know. It's someone you know is at the center of this. So why don't you talk about it and talk about Kevin Roberts because you know him. So
yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that it's like he's become like the main character of conservative Twitter or conservative X
right.
for a week now, and there's a lot of people saying a lot of different things about him. Apparently, he is a Catholic supremacist. I don't know. I mean, it's weird just because, like, I'm sure, like, a lot of it is lies, but I don't know the guy, so I don't know what's lies, what's true. So why don't you clear some of this for us?
Yeah. So Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, we'll get to why he's in the news in a minute. But before he was at Heritage, he ran an organization called the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which I also used to work for. We did not overlap there. I had left TPPF by the time that he got there. When I was there, Brooke Rollins was running the organization. Now she's the Secretary of Agriculture. So one thing you could say is, being the head of TPPF, you get to go places, right? But anyway, so we didn't overlap, but we did work together on a lot of stuff while he was there at TPPF. And so I got to know him decently well. I wouldn't say we were like close friends or anything, but we were colleagues and we worked on various things. And I always found him to be very intelligent, principled, not afraid to say and stick by his point of view, even in hostile audiences. Not in a like he was always a kind of a soft spoken guy, I would say, but he didn't sugarcoat it. So he had a lot of admirable qualities. One story in particular that sticks with me is during the summer of 2020. When there was all the George Floyd stuff and COVID stuff and everything was going on. It was like the summer of cancellations. And there was an incident where one of his employees at TPPF had tweeted something that was kind of, I don't think he meant it this way, but the way it was worded kind of made it sound like it didn't matter if Hispanic people died from COVID. Okay, so this is just and there's lots of incidents like this, especially back then. But for years and years, you would have something where someone would say something that was maybe not put the best, or sometimes it would be taken out of context or whatever, and there you would just get a big mob that would go up. And in pretty much every other case that I can think of, certainly from that time period, when that happens, whatever the organization is, they just, they fire the person, they cut ties. It doesn't matter if it was a conservative organization, not a conservative organization. It's just, it's too much hassle. In this case, you had state senators calling for this guy to be fired or whatever, but Kevin wouldn't do it. He put out a statement. He said, respectfully, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to give it. So I always found that to be, very admirable. Certainly the sort of, if I ever found myself in that sort of situation, I would want a boss like Kevin Roberts. So I have a lot of respect for him. And the controversy, of course, is, we talked about the Fuentes Tucker interview. I don't think we really need to rehash all of that. I think we've already kind of given our opinions on that, which, I see no reason to change it. But on Thursday, so I think we recorded, did we record Tuesday, Wednesday? I don't know.
Yeah, I think we recorded Tuesday.
Yes. Shortly after we recorded, whenever it was, the controversy was still going on. And Kevin, on behalf of Heritage, put out this kind of short video statement, which was, I remember watching it and thinking, well, this is kind of strange. Not only for the content of it, in the statement, I should say, was, supportive of Tucker, hostile towards the critics of Tucker. It didn't name anybody in particular. And while not supportive exactly of Nick Fuentes, also, I think it said, we abhor his views, but we don't think he should be canceled, whatever. And the statement was odd, in my opinion, for a couple reasons. One is, there's some issues with the content, some of the wording. We can get into that a little bit more. But the bigger odd thing for me was just the fact that they put out the statement at all. I didn't feel like up until that point in the conversation, there had been some huge groundswell of people saying, what does the Heritage Foundation think about this? I know that there had been, I think earlier that day, Josh Hammer, who is editor at Newsweek, had on X, he had highlighted something about how like Tucker had been taken off some Heritage Foundation page or something, suggesting that like Heritage was disassociating itself from Tucker or whatever. But this was not like, this was not a huge part of the discourse. I hadn't even heard about this. And so it didn't seem like it was necessary to address, certainly not to do like a big video thing like that. But, in so doing, I think it kind of provoked its own firestorm. In some ways, even, I don't know if you would say it's bigger than the Nick Tucker interview itself. In a way it can't be because it's a subset of it, but it has been like a kind of huge firestorm. And there, of course, in the subsequent days, there have been Kevin has given like a series of subsequent statements, kind of walking back some of the things that he said and ultimately apologizing and so on and so forth. And various people have resigned. There have been, there's all sorts of criticisms. There was, as you alluded to, someone yesterday was circulating a letter that purports to be from a Heritage Foundation staffer, kind of detailing problems with Kevin Roberts. The letter itself is very weird. It seems to be written by someone who doesn't really speak English. There's all sorts of like weird grammatical, it says like he used the F word on staff, it's like, what? That's not how you say that or whatever. So as of right now, I think the situation is still in flux. Kevin's former chief of staff, who some people have speculated may have drafted the statement for him or whatever, he resigned. It looks like for right now, Kevin Roberts is not resigning. He's not going to be forced out, but who knows? Obviously there's a lot of both inside and outside the organization. There's a lot of consternation and Heritage is in the news. I think you could say that.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, so just to update, as we're recording, I think leaks are coming out of an all hands meeting. So he had the statement, then he had a follow-up statement, and he has gone on some podcasts.
Yeah.
People have gotten, some people have been mollified, but a lot of people got even more mad. So he said, this is what apparently he said in the all hands. We're recording Wednesday. I made a mistake. I let you down, and I let down this institution. Period. Full stop. So that basically probably won't stop the some of the drama, but I think he's basically admitting, oh, that was
Right.
using, it was an F word up, you know?
Yes. Right. Right.
So I think the issue here is, the statement wasn't that long. Um, and so, I know his history partly through you. And so I think I understood why his initial reflex, whoever wrote that, why his initial reflex was to go along with saying, we don't go along with cancel culture. Because he
Right.
probably is taking a maximalist line there. The problem is, as we talked extensively, the interview with Tucker was weird. And, we don't need to talk about that detail, but although I do have to say, Fuentes is talking about how Tucker's part of the team now with Yee and all the other anti-Semites. I don't think this is actually working out well for Tucker.
All the white supremacists, Tucker. Nick
Yeah.
Fuentes, Myron Gaines.
Yeah, I don't think that. I'm assuming Tucker was not anticipating that.
Right. Yeah.
This like bear hug embrace, which is probably unwelcome, but it's happening.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the issue with the cancellation wasn't that. I think the problem people had, I mean, the one that I had, wasn't. It was the content of the interview, not that he platformed him. So that
Right.
was like a minor thing. I think the bigger thing is he did say Tucker is his friend because like Heritage funds Tucker's show somehow.
They buy
Um,
ads on it or whatever.
yeah, and they're friends. I mean, Tucker has a lot of friends. He has a lot of people in his debt. He's done a lot of great things for people, and he said, that friendship was, basically you couldn't break that friendship. Which,
Right.
okay, that's a bit much when you're the head of the Heritage Foundation and you're speaking with your institutional voice. Like he can't do anything. Now that's a separate issue if they're personal friends. If you're talking about in that capacity, I think.
Right.
Although even then, if like I don't know if if Tucker murdered his whole family, I think that would also end.
Yeah.
So I mean that's not even literally true. But I think
Not
I know what he was getting at, and I think a lot of people actually I know a lot of people were pretty angry particularly because of the issue relating to like speaking with heritage institutional voice in that way. That's separate from other people, and like I think our friend John Davidson, I'm really close, your close friend, but he wrote a thing in Federalist where he said this is actually an attack on JD and his foreign policy because a lot of neoconservatives, a lot of Jewish conservatives, just are going all out at this point, and it's not just Jewish conservatives, and we're in group chats where there's non-Jews that are also offended, and it's not even non-Jews that are like there are non-Jews in public who are like pretty pissed too. But pretty much every single Jewish conservative that I've seen is either like annoyed to extremely angry, and like some of them are, Ariel Azarad, I think is her last name. I don't know. Our friend Jeremy Carl's mentee at the Hoover Institution,
Yeah.
she's Jewish.
Davidson, I think she got married, right?
Yes, yeah, she got married, so she has a new surname, and I forget the new surname. It's a weird. I don't want to say weird, but I think it's a Sephardic Jewish surname. I think he's part Israeli or Israeli. Anyway, American. But in any case, my only point is, she's on my timeline. We've been mutuals for a long time. She's extremely MAGA. Okay, she has been for a long time. She is extremely unhappy. And I think part of the issue is like a lot of the Jews are wondering if they have a place on the right because like they do not have. If Nick Fuentes has a place on the right, they do not have a place on the right. That's just you cannot have the two together in any sort of coalition.
Yeah.
Because Ben Shapiro did a whole thing where he went through everything Nick Fuentes said, and like I'll tell you like I'm in one group chat where there was a Jewish person who is not American, and they said, well, I mean, I watched the interview, and I think it's like people are overreacting a little bit, and I'm like, Google him, and then he came back 5 minutes later, and he was like, oh crap, okay, yes, I see what you're saying. So a lot of people don't know anything about because they didn't get it from Nick's interview with Tucker about his track record of basically saying genocidal things, about Jews in particular, but just all sorts of things, but in particular about Jews over and over again. There's no way if you're Jewish, you are going to be comfortable with this guy in your coalition, right? And so any potential daylight for these Nick and the Groypers is going to send the Jews, out. And Jews are like pretty big. I mean, like at like think tanks and the intelligentsia, they're pretty well represented on the right. So this is causing a massive, massive fissure. And then there's people like Matt Walsh, also like Knowles, what's his name? I forget his first name, but
Mike,
anyway,
Mike Mills.
Michael Knowles. They work at the Daily Wire, so they kind of work for Ben Shapiro. Although Ben Shapiro's not day to day operations anymore. Ben
Mhm.
Shapiro's obviously Jewish, very proudly Jewish, whatever. And
Right.
he had basically like I think his Monday podcast was basically like a 45-minute screed against Fuentes and then Tucker. Like he's
Right.
totally unfriended Tucker.
Yeah.
And so like these people are caught in the middle, so it's causing a lot of drama. Like I tweeted out like circular firing squad. That's what it looks like right now.
Hmm.
And part of the issue I think is, and I would say I'll include myself in this. Like I'm not like happy like with the Kevin Roberts original statement. I'm willing to give grace, but obviously like people make mistakes. But that was just a bad move. But I'm not like a neocon. I'm not a Jewish, pro Israel first type of person. Like I think people know my track record. I probably lean Israel, but like I think we're a little too involved. But like a lot of people like me are also annoyed because uh like setting aside the ethical, moral, deontological, principled aspect of like no, we cannot have groypers in our movement.
Right.
And we'll talk about this election, but it's
Yeah.
just it's not good politics. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think what you are saying and what John Davidson are saying are both true in that there is definitely there definitely was and is a lot of organic outrage, hostility, opposition, however you want to say it, to the interview and then the response, the defenses or semi-defenses of the interview, all the heritage stuff that really has, pissed people off for, not for any like ulterior motives necessarily, right? But just because, I mean, everything from like the moral aspects to, this is not good politics to, you're attacking, uh, you know, my friends, I mean, even like a lot of other so-called alt-right or dissident right or however what you want to call it, they don't like Nick either because he's like, constantly beefing with everybody. So that's true, but I do think that John Davidson is not wrong in that some people are also trying to use this as a kind of a proxy war, ultimately against Vance, but also like I mean, it's direction of the future of the Republican Party. Right now, the party is the Republican coalition is kind of like weird, broadly divergent, and it's kind of just held together by Trump, right? There are certainly people in the Republican Party who don't even like Trump, but they kind of accept him. He's what it is, and but he's not going to run again, probably. So he's a lame duck. So people are trying to think about well, what comes next, and Vance is kind of the heir apparent, and on one level, I mean it's kind of weird because Vance is clearly more sympathetic to I don't even know like I mean Vance is not sympathetic to the Groypers, but his views on like foreign policy, on like free speech, on a variety of things are they're not those of John Podhoretz or John Bolton or whoever. I actually don't think Vance has ever said or done anything skeptical of Israel per se, but some of this goes beyond Israel to like more general foreign policy. He's more, Vance is more of a non-interventionist. He's more like of a, immigration, like he's a kind of a, hardcore immigration skeptic, and he's more, like I don't I think we might not have even talked about this, or maybe we did, but there was the whole thing a few weeks ago where like some group chat thing got leaked and people had made some like jokes about the Holocaust or whatever, and Vance tweeted something about how like this was being overblown or something like that. So in that respect, he's like closer to the online right than the National Review. Okay. On the other hand, like Nick Fuentes really hates Vance. I mean, Nick Fuentes, like sees Vance as a kind of, I guess you would have to say, is like kind of a Trojan horse type figure. He doesn't like the fact that Vance has a Indian wife, and mixed race children, right? Because that's something that Nick, as a pure Aryan type, is very much against. So he doesn't like that. He thinks like JD Vance is some sort of Zionist shill, as of course he thinks is true of basically everybody. So it's like weird and complicated. I don't know. It's like hard to me, it's like trying to tie JD Vance to Nick Fuentes doesn't make any sense. Obviously, Tucker's the conduit between that, because I would say Vance and Tucker share to some extent, some general foreign policy views.
I mean, they're friends, and Tucker's son is chief of staff, right?
Right. Yes, that's a.
So they're closely connected. Like he was like the first guest. Tucker was the first guest when JD was hosting the Charlie Kirk show, or whatever TPUSA thing. And so there's a connection there. I mean, JD is kind of at the middle of a lot of this stuff.
Right.
I mean, implicitly, not explicitly.
Yeah.
Because he's the heir apparent.
Right. Because he is the heir apparent. So I think that definitely is kind of in the background of this now, where I don't know if John Davidson does this exactly, but I have seen people do this, is that sometimes what will happen is they will say, well, look, people are using this Tucker thing as a pretext, for this larger, succession crisis and trying to define the future of the, conservative movement. Or, is it going to be MAGA? Or are they going to go back to, Reagan or whatever? And then they will use that as an argument to saying, like, to kind of delegitimize all substantive criticism across the board. It's like, okay, well, people are using this, so it doesn't matter, whether the Tucker interview was good or bad, or whether the Heritage, Roberts statement was good or bad, or anything like that, right? And I don't think that's right. I think, the fact that some people are, even granting that some people are using this controversy pretextually in that way doesn't invalidate the controversy. And in fact, like, part of the reason why people are mad is because, Nick, I would say, also has an agenda, right? He's also trying to influence the future of the conservative movement in his own direction, which I think would be substantively bad and would also be politically disastrous, and I do I mean, maybe you could, I know we've talked about it a little bit, you might want to go into it, because like I do, there is a generational shift, I would say, both on the issue of Israel specifically, and then also on issues of like taboo subjects and, how big a deal it is if you're talking about taboo subjects. But I think like people kind of overstate it. People got to Rod Dreher, I mean, God bless him. He was quoted in some story that like 40% of the GOP staff are Groypers, or, which is like the name for like Nick Fuentes fans. Like, Rod, there's no way you could possibly know that. And B, it just sounds like hysterical. Like, why are you doing that? Just calm down.
Well, I mean, to be the context is like he's a source. I think Michelle Goldberg's column in the New York Times
Yeah,
about how Nick Fuentes is the new Charlie Kirk, which also they
right.
used like kind of a handsome photo of him or
Yeah,
touched up photo of him.
yeah,
So it was kind of weird. The whole thing was weird. And like I always like my joke is like you never go full Rod Dreher, where it's like I love Rod. I hung out with him when he came to Austin and stuff like that. I
yeah.
consider him a friend, but like he can get a little bit. I don't want to use the word hysterical, but a little bit hysterical.
He
Um,
is. He is. Uh, but he is very emotionally overwrought, as Tucker can be, also in his own way, in a different way. But yeah, sometimes he just needs to, pump the brakes. I would say. We have a mutual friend. I know I'm not going to say who it is, but I we have a mutual friend who, back when Rod was at the American Conservative, would send like Rod fake letters, you know, from like leftists or like exposing just like parody stuff, and Rod would just run with it and be like, "I got this letter, and you'll never believe about the like you know." On college campuses, lesbian Satanists, or yeah, I don't know, whatever it would be. Um, so that's just a case that I know about personally, So anyway, not to get too sidetracked on Rod Dreher, but I think he's not alone in this. I think that
yeah.
in general, like people need, like there's a kind of a hothouse environment right now on this stuff, and without dismissing the importance of the issues, because I do think they are important, and I think there are, you have to be strategic about this stuff, and you have to have clarity about some of this stuff. You also I don't think it serves anybody to be too overwrought about it, right? That's part of the problem. That's part of my problem with how Tucker deals with a lot of this stuff, is that he's also like just very like hyperbolic, overwrought,
Yeah.
and
Well, I mean,
conspiracy.
Rod and Tucker have and like Rod and Tucker are friends or were friends. I think like probably no longer. Rod's been people can check out Rod Dreher's Substack. Like he has been basically he's kind of read Tucker out of polite society because of the Nick Fuentes. And I do have to say you know, I'm not religious, but God bless him. Like I think Rod's heart is in the right place. He's actually like pretty big-hearted and broad about just like people in the conservative movement or just like in his ideological ambit. And so I do feel like he can be a little bit screechy, but when he cuts you out, like you probably have. I mean, he's not like Mark Levin, okay? Just to
Right.
give it. So Mark Levin is conservative, talk radio guy, very very he would be the type of guy, and he is obviously Jewish just by the name. You would say Israel first, like that's the appellation you would use to insult. Okay, I'm not necessarily saying he is, but he's very pro-Israel, very neocon aligned, although not exactly a neocon himself. Like he's, I think he went from like many of them went from like Cruz to Trump over the years,
Yeah.
but and Ted Cruz, by the way, has been speaking out, and
Right. Yes.
no,
Very.
Ted can be kind of a showboater, and I think his, in the interview with Tucker, I didn't agree with everything Tucker said about like say Christianity and philo-Semitism with Ted Cruz,
Mhm.
but I did think that like I actually enjoyed and appreciated Tucker's pushback because again, Ted Cruz has expressed a view on Israel that I think is just like it's a bit much, and that's where the younger Groyper and Groyper adjacent response is coming from,
Yeah.
right? So back to heritage though, and I do want to like hit this. Kevin Roberts' job was and probably still is potentially under threat. He's probably like dodging the bullet right now, but clearly he's burnt up a lot of capital.
Right.
He cannot have any other like
Yeah.
issue like this in the near future or because people on the board like there's a guy Robbie George at Chicago professor who's on the Heritage Board.
Yeah.
Chris DeMuth, I think the former like two heads ago of the Heritage Foundation
Right.
resigned from I think the board.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of grumbling about this, And one thing that I did say about the Kevin Roberts statement, which like early on, is I can see if you take it literally, and from what you have told me about Kevin Roberts and what I know, why he would say that and what he intended. But I think like in like critical theories, the idea of signifiers and symbols and semiotics, right, where you say one thing, you can take it literally, but really people are going to take something deeper. So it's like it would be like if I said I support family values in 1998. Well, you
Right.
could not support family values, but you know exactly what I mean, you know?
Yeah.
And what he said, like some of the stuff sounded like he was like winking to Groypers. And that's why a lot of people suspect that he did not write that himself because
Right.
he would probably not have dropped those in if he knew, you know, like
Yeah.
some of the phraseology and stuff apparently was like a little too close to things that they'd heard elsewhere, and so people are like drawing like, oh, he wants to like keep, and he has said that he doesn't want to totally alienate the youth, even though he is like um, I mean, he's basically like not thrown Nick Fuentes under the bus because he never had him on the bus, but
Yeah.
he's been very clear about Nick Fuentes being unacceptable. But he's also said, and I think this is legit. He does want to open a space so that these young disaffected males can be redeemed. And the whole Groyper phenomenon is like weird. Nick Fuentes is like a mixed race white supremacist, and then
Right.
you look at a lot of the Groypers like and they're like, oh, they're not even white.
Right.
It's just the whole thing is like very strange and
Yeah.
perplexing to normal people, um, and we're not we're not here to do an anthropology of them, nor can we. But I will say that you know it's essential to understand that they are marginal and they don't really, contrary to what Rod is saying, they don't represent like a huge because so the surveys that I see from like Blue Rose from David Shore is that like anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish feeling, like depending on how you measure it, is like converging on zero for baby boomers, which
Hmm.
is plausible, like very low, below 5%. Among
Right.
like Gen X and older millennials, it's like goes up to 10 to 15%, and then among like Zoomers, among like early 20 somethings, it's
Yeah.
like up to about like 25%. Like it's a little higher among right wing Zoomers and a little lower among left wing Zoomers, actually.
Yeah.
But like, it's increased a lot. And, again, like I don't think you should take the 25% literally. It's kind of like, what is the warmth towards Israel and towards Jews overall? And a lot of it also non-white young conservatives in particular are particularly anti-Semitic, you know,
Right.
which makes sense in light of like what we know somewhat of the demographics of the Groypers and whatnot. But in terms of heritage, they're not. I mean, they're not a think tank in a way that they're extremely partisan. Whereas like AEI and Brookings, although de facto on the right and the left, they tend to keep a little bit more distance from the rough and tumble of politics. Although I think during what was the guy from South Carolina, Demint, during his time leading Heritage, he
Mm.
started Heritage Action, I think, and
Right.
apparently it got like so political in terms of being just like about like Republican politics that was the reason he was pushed out. So they had their limit.
Yeah.
Now I think Kevin Roberts is trying to make it a little bit more relevant directly to policy, but I think like when you wrestle with a pig you come out dirty. This is, I think, what's happened. I think he tried to like engage with something that he didn't understand the gravity of what was going to happen, and now he's got all this mud that he's trying to wash off himself. And the more he says, the more people are getting even more angry. I do think. I mean, just looking at look, if people should check out Ben Shapiro's podcast from Monday. It's 40 minutes, but he has all these quotes from Nick Fuentes. The thing
Yeah.
is that people are like, "Ha ha," like he's just joking or he's trolling. But like, if you were Jewish, like, how many times does a guy have to make jokes about the Holocaust and like killing Jewish
Yes.
magicians and
I mean, someone was clearly not joking. I mean,
it
you.
doesn't. No, his affect is not always joking,
Right. Well,
But people say like, oh, it's a troll, it's a LARP, but it's like, come
sure.
on,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. So I mean, he he does use a lot of humor and whatever. Um, and hyperbole or whatever. So I could see that. But I mean, there's some things that I have seen that are not even from his show. They're like speeches that he's given where he's like, "It's a holy war and the Jews are going to die," and go back to their master Satan or what. It's kind of weird because I guess it was done like on Zoom, so he's got like this weird apocalyptic background thing going on, at least in the clip that I saw. Um, so yeah, I mean it's pretty bad, and 25%. I mean that's a even of the even just looking at young people, 25%. I mean that's a clear minority, but that's still distressingly large. You could see why people would be concerned about that, and ironically, I do think that if you want to address that, you do have to kind of, try to win over, if not Groypers themselves, then at least like, Groyper curious or Groyper adjacent or whatever people back to, what you view as a more mainstream position. Bethany Mandel, the author, she wrote something for the Forward many years ago. The article, the title was something like "We need to start befriending neo-Nazis," right? And online, people will periodically like tweet that at her as if she's saying, neo-Nazis are fine, like we should all be friends. So what she's saying is, no, like if you want, uh, you don't want people to be neo-Nazis. You want them, if someone has those beliefs, you want to convince them of the error of their ways. And one of the best ways to do that not is through friendship. Trying to like respond to them as a human being, not as a host of the noxious ideas that they hold. So I think in one of when Kevin in one of his statements, I think he was saying something about trying to like bring in the Groypers or whatever. I think that's what he was trying to get at. Is like that's the plan, and that is like necessary if we're going to live together in a country. Like if you, yeah.
I would say, and part of the problem is everyone has their own line,
Right.
so like the Bulwark, Never Trump group are obviously, and like they see an opportunity and they're taking it, right? But
Right.
that's different than someone like me, right? And I would just say, Nick Fuentes, no, that guy is not redeemable. He's 27 now. He's been doing this for 9 years. I mean, okay, he's not. He's literally, yes, he is redeemable. But come on, he's been doing this for 9 years,
Right.
and like he has a huge track record. And it's not like, oh, he was just like a dumb 16-year-old.
Sure.
Okay,
Yes.
so that's one case. I think the case of like a lot of young men in particular, but not just men, but just these young people that are Groypers, Groyper adjacent, I think that's totally correct that they can change, and people have changed in American history. We live in a state in Texas where segregation was the law of the land
Right.
until, I mean, it was pretty much enforced until the 60s, right? Although Brown versus Board of Education was 54. In any case, it was enforced until the 60s. There's a lot of people that are still alive today who were racist when they were younger, but they're fine now. I'm assuming, and like I think they are actually, and so people change. That's not a shocking thing, and so I think we have to make these sorts of distinctions about who and whom, and how we approach this, and then also in Kevin Roberts' personal capacity, I think that's a separate issue in terms of how much charity should be given, as opposed to Heritage Foundation, which is trying to be an institution that is trying to get something done functionally in the world. And now, like all of these people on Heritage's anti-Semitism task force are retiring. Like you might think that they're overreacting, but you can kind of understand. I can kind of understand where they're coming from.
Right.
Because like again, like there is no ambiguity about Nick Fuentes. Now, I've said this on social media. I still think that I don't put Tucker Carlson in the same category as Nick Fuentes. Tucker Carlson has a massive track record of helping a lot of different people in a lot of different instances and being generous. He also has instances of being kooky and I think like going into ill-advised territory. So it's a mixed bag. I don't really appreciate his direction. We talked about this last week.
Yeah.
The interview was like, in my opinion, a travesty. But if he writes his ship by my lights, he's not gonna. I'm not. He's not there to satisfy me. But I'm just saying, like, I could still accept him as someone I respect and will listen to. 5 years from now, if he does a lot of interviews that are good, in my opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Nick Fuentes, like, I'm always going to be suspicious. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, there are different categories for me. Whereas a lot of people, like Ben Shapiro basically has written Tucker off, and we know people who know Tucker and that are worried about him. A lot of people are worried about him, right? And maybe they're right to worry, and maybe he is like going to go, full Fuentes. I don't know. I can't see into his heart right now. I don't know what he's thinking, but I think he can. My own opinion is like I would give him just a little bit of charity and a little bit of grace to exit out of the path that he is on. The path that he is on is not one that I think is one where he's on the Candace Owens path at least, minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Like Candace Owens, for example, like I'm sorry, just like
it's
she's hot, but she's crazy. Like I don't take her seriously. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't even like. It's not even like I'm scared of her. It's like she's just not a serious person anymore. And Tucker's on that path.
Even to the point where I think even Nick Fuentes has done videos about like how her theories are too anti-Semitic for him or too like crazy or whatever.
She's kind of become a buffoon, honestly, but
right, yeah. So
which is a separate thing.
Yeah, I guess there's two things that I would say here that kind of make it complicated. One is all of these things kind of exist on a spectrum. Even if you just look at Nick Fuentes and his show, there are people, who are like devoted Fuentes super fans, and they apparently will take oaths of personal loyalty, right? There's some acronym. I think it's like PKD NJF, right? Which is like I will rape, kill, or die for Nicholas J. Fuentes. Okay, so that's pretty messed up, That's pretty. So that's on one side, but then I'm sure there are also going to be a lot of people who just tune into the show and watch the show because they think it's kind of funny and kind of edgy, and they don't actually wish harm on anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the clips. So he made fun of. He made my friend.
And people everywhere in between. Yeah. So that's one element that makes it complicated. And then the other thing that I think makes it complicated is particularly because everybody's on a different trajectory, and so partly of that, and then also partly because the right is it's a small world, and like there's a lot of behind the scenes intertwining friendships and relationships that make it difficult. So you mentioned Michael Knowles, who works with Ben. Michael Knowles and Candace Owens go to the same church. I think he might be godfather to one of her children. I'm not sure, but so like there's lots of like weird connections there that can be used for good or for ill. Like people can use it to try and attack somebody through association, or people can be reluctant to speak out about something where they should because of the personal loyalties. But on the other hand, people can like bring people back in the fold, and people change over time. I personally, I get what you're saying. I think that like personally, I think there's no one who can't be redeemed. Now, obviously, for some people, especially
Sure.
like that can mean something else, right? Like you always have to worry about you know sincerity or whatever. But I know people who were like legit neo-Nazi, and not just like you know online poster neo-Nazis or you know genteel like intellectual neo-Nazis, but like street brawler type people who went to prison and had like a religious conversion and um, totally changed their outlook and their life or whatever. So I think that can happen and that can be legitimate. And I would hope that for Nick and for everybody else, I you have to be, I think, realistic and prudent about it. You can't just be like, oh well, you know, Nick went on Tucker, and when Tucker said you shouldn't blame Jews as a group, he says, "Oh, I agree with that. So great, it's all done." And then, the next day he goes back on his show and he's like, "Get out of my country, you dirty Jew," or whatever. Like, obviously, that's not serious. Um, so there would have to be, I mean, it would be a harder thing, and maybe not that likely. But I do like just as a I'm gonna, just my own theological and other things. I do think that like that's possible for everybody, right?
Yeah, yeah. Let's see what else. Just like how we close out. I mean, I think I think it's good to have this discussion now, and not closer to 2026 or 2028.
Right.
I will. I probably. I do think. I have to be honest. Like at this point, I think JD needs to say something. I don't know how many times his wife and children can be insulted in public, but after a while, it's starting to seem a little weird.
I get.
Um,
I mean, maybe you're right. My instinct at this point is that you just draw more attention and add more fuel to the fire, and so I think that there is a case.
like maybe in a couple of months. I think, but I think I don't think he can wait until 2028. You know what I'm saying? Or until like because he's gonna run. He's the heir apparent. Like this is having. I mean, it's getting weird. It's just getting weird, and I think people are getting weird impressions of right wing politics that
Yeah.
I don't think are totally correct. Like a lot of people didn't know who Nick Fuentes was. Boomers are still boomers are still disproportionately voters and all these things. It's just like this is all just really weird, and it's as Barack Hussein Obama would say, this is a distraction.
Yeah.
This is a distraction. So let's move on from the distraction.
Okay.
Let's talk about the election. So election happened.